death row blues. Lord, I ain't got no go back home. Death row blues. Lord, I ain't got no go back home. Done lost my woman and every doggone thing on. Mean old judge, state's attorney, wouldn't be here today, Lord, Lord, if I had some money, death row blues. Lord, I ain't got no go back home.
They say death row, we say hell no. They say death row, we say hell no. Hell no. Hell no.
I want to thank Darby Tillis and Chris Lynch on guitar. Darby's the first exonerated death row prisoner from Illinois. He's an amazingly talented person. Woo! He's full of talent and passion, and we're going to hear a few words from Darby later on, and also a beautiful song that he's written about Troy Davis. I'd like to welcome everybody to tonight's awesome event with Howard Zinn and Dave Zirin. My name is Marlene Martin. I'm with the Campaign to End the Death Penalty. Tonight's meeting is part of a weekend-long event that the campaign holds every year. It's our annual convention. Tonight's event was actually sponsored by many groups, and I want to thank them and acknowledge each and every one of them. Cop Watch, 8th Day Center for Justice, the Illinois Coalition to Abolish the Death Penalty, the Illinois Coalition for the Fair Sentencing of Children, the International Socialist Organization, the National Alliance Against Political Repression and Racism, the Organization of Black Students here at U of C, Students Organized and United with Labor, TAN's Year 10, and Haymarket Books. Just a word about Haymarket Books. Howard Zinn has said we need to have a truly radical press like Haymarket Press because, quote, we need to create a culture in this country in which reading and resistance go hand in hand. Yeah. And tonight, Haymarket has a special hand-in-hand deal. You can get 2 copies of Howard's Voices of a People's History of the United States for the price of 1, and that will get you started on your holiday shopping. And great deal. We're also excited to say that a documentary version of Voices entitled "The People Speak" will debut on December 13th on the History Channel. Yay! So mark your calendars, December 13th. Now, many of the groups that I listed here tonight have their literature and materials in the back, so please go out there and get loaded up with information and sign their lists, and check out the campaign table too, and get your Campaign to End the Death Penalty t-shirt so that we're ready to come back next year's convention even more equipped and ready to go. Now, when we invited Howard Zinn to be our keynote speaker, I have to admit that I really did think it was a long shot because he's so much in demand. And I do have to confess that I nearly fainted when I found out and he agreed to come and speak. But you know, after I thought about it, I shouldn't have been so surprised. Howard has always made his voice available to the grassroots struggles, the social justice struggles, the struggles against racism, which is part of our fight too. And there was another reason that I shouldn't have been so surprised. Because in 1996, Howard agreed to be part of the first meeting that launched the campaign to end the death penalty. He spoke with Cornel West and Lawrence Hayes, who's here tonight, and more than 500 people turned out to get our group started. Now, I know that all of us are anxious to hear from Howard and David, but we do want to just ask that you be patient and take a few minutes, because we want to share with Howard and all of you what we've been up to for the past 13 years. And I want to ask 4 people who are part of our campaign to say a few brief words. And the first is Marvin Reeves, who's on the phone. Wait. I got a good intro, okay? I got a good intro, so let me say it first. Okay. Marvin Reeves, who we had the wonderful pleasure of seeing take his first steps as a free man this July after 21 years in prison, falsely convicted and incarcerated. Marvin and his co-defendant, Ronnie Kitchen, were the victims of torture right here in the police interrogation rooms of Chicago by John Burge and his men. Ronnie was beaten into signing a confession and went to death row, and Marvin was given a sentence of life without the possibility of parole. For 21 years, these men were locked up because the police and prosecutors fabricated a case against them. But they never stopped fighting. Ronnie got together with Stanley Howard to form the group called the Death Row 10, that they called themselves the Death Row 10, a group of prisoners tortured onto death row. And actually they made their first leaflets for a protest that we organized on the outside by cutting up different phrases from the New Abolitionist and other papers that they had. They asked the campaign if we would be the voice, their voice on the outside, which we were very proud to do. And actually there's, on the newsletter that I think everybody has a copy of, there's a front page story about Marvin and Ronnie in it. Ronnie was here earlier, but unfortunately couldn't be here tonight. But it's my great honor to introduce to you a friend and a fighter, and finally a free man, Marvin Reed.
Thank you. Thank you very much. It feels good. It feels good. You know, I come here today so I can tell y'all my story. Just a small part. And I really want y'all to know how important y'all is to me. The reason why Ronnie's not here today, because he wanted to go shake the governor's hand. I don't want to shake the governor's hand. I want to look in the faces of the people that have freed me. That's what I want to do. It feels good. You know, I'm just one of a lot of people that's innocent, that's locked up. And I'd like to give thanks to the campaign, because if it wasn't for them, I'd probably still be locked up. It wasn't the big people that made the noise for me, the ones that I expected. It was the little people that made the noise for me. You know? I had almost gave up hope. I was in my cell on my last appeal. Just like all the other ones, I know when it came back, it was gonna say denied. And some told me to turn on the news. When I turned on the news, I seen people that I didn't even know. Not none of my friends, guys I ran the street with, guys I spent my money with. I didn't see none of them. I seen people I didn't know, like Noreen, Marlene and them, holding signs up with my face on it, saying free Marvin Reeves. I'm like, wow, I don't even know these people. But for some reason, they know me. I knew right then it was time to get up and fight. Man, God is good. You know? They had buried me in the penitentiary with no return. You got to understand, if you don't know nothing about the law, they got what they call the motion of discovery, meaning that all the work that the state's attorneys do, they turn it over to your lawyers. Guess what? I didn't find out I had one till 20 years. And the motion of discovery that I found pointed the finger at somebody else, not me and running. I'm like, wow, God is good. I'm saying to myself, it was the little people that took on the cause, not the big people. I'm talking about, I wrote many letters that fell on deaf ears to Jesse Jackson, Reverend Meeks, and any other protesting group that I thought would help. But I always came back, we think you need a lawyer. But oh boy, when I seen the new abolition, the death and the kill the death penalty, I said to myself, these people is on something. And I need to be on it with it. And I got my family, I rallied my family, I said, y'all need to go down there and see these people. Because it ain't all bad, it's all good. And we discovered some things that you wouldn't believe that happen in America today. I said to myself, wow, I'm the guy that used to sit in front of the TV and watch the news. Man, I'm glad they got that guy. That could have been my mother. Man, I'm glad they got that guy. That could have been my sister. Boy, they came and got me. I said, wow. Maybe all that wasn't true. Then they said a guy named John Burge. I'm like, wow, not in America. Because in America, they believe in justice because they stand on it so strong. And when they got me, I said, Lord, have mercy. The snake has risen his head, and he's striking everywhere. And he just won on. It's a lot of John Burges out there. And it's the small people, like the people that come out today, that would make a difference. I'm gonna make my time up here short, because it's a lot more people that talk. But to me, in the great words of the late Malcolm X, any person, I say any person, he said any man, but I'm gonna say any person because that means women included. That won't stand for nothing, you'll fall for anything. America is yours. Don't belong to the crooked judges, the crooked state's attorneys, the crooked politicians. America belongs to the people. And I believe the people's job is to take America back. Stay good and be blessed.
Davis has been on death row in Georgia for the past 18 years. He has faced down 3 execution dates and was at the end of his appeals when the Supreme Court this fall finally ruled that he would be allowed to introduce new evidence of his innocence to a court for the first time. Unbelievable that they wouldn't let him. Many of you, I'm sure, have heard about this case, and the biggest reason why is because of the woman I'm going to be introducing to you. She has led the way in the fight to win justice for her brother and to abolish the death penalty. Protest is why Troy Davis is alive today, and the reason people were organized to protest is right here, Martina Correia.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate you standing up on your crutches with that I Am Troy Davis shirt. There you go. There you go. Well, as many of you know, my brother Troy Anthony Davis was sentenced to death in Georgia in 1991 based on solely eyewitness testimony. There were 9 non-police witnesses that testified against him that Troy was convicted and sentenced to death. No weapon, no DNA, no motive, no anything. And over the years, 7 of the 9 eyewitnesses have recanted their testimony due to police or prosecutorial misconduct. Yet because of the Anti-Terrorism and Effective Death Penalty Act, we were not able to introduce this because in the United States of America, it is not unconstitutional to execute an innocent person if the state feels they got a fair trial at the beginning. So people need to understand how dangerous this act is. And the Anti-Terrorism and Effective Death Penalty Act does not attack the rich. It only attacks the poor and people who cannot fight against it. But I will tell you on this Monday, Congressman Hank Johnson did introduce a bill that is the Effective Death Penalty and Terrorism Act, and we hope to counter this anti-terrorism bill and bring justice to innocent people all across the country. Yeah. So, yes. What people don't realize is that in my brother Troy's case, not only does he have 7 out of 9 eyewitnesses who've recanted due to coercion or police misconduct, you have 9 additional witnesses who've never been heard in a court of law, including the nephew of one of the 2 witnesses that didn't recant that actually say they saw this man commit the murder. And we later found out that this man is a police informant, but you know, Troy still remains on death row. He's faced 3 executions coming within 23 hours of being executed, 2 weeks of being executed, and 90 minutes of being executed. And my family has had to go through that trauma each time. But every time we went through that, there have always been hundreds of thousands of people across the world sending in petitions, writing letters, holding rallies, doing everything to say, I am Troy Davis and this will stop. And yes. So Troy is alive today because of grassroots activism like we've been talking about. And that's one of the reasons that I'm so honored here to be able to meet Howard Zinn. And it's just really, you know, it comes full circle when you read about people and you see television stories about people, and then when you realize that you're becoming one of those people. And it's just, you know, it's just really amazing to me that I'll be able to go back to, I call it Savannah, Georgia, and tell people that I actually have met Howard Zinn. And nobody will believe me, but I'm taking pictures. But I want you to know that we have to stay in this fight for civil and human rights. And we have to be determined and not deterred. And we have to be in this for the long haul, just like Mr. Zinn. I have been an activist since I was 13 years old, and I am now 42, and I am never going to stop fighting against injustice until it's all gone. And we should all do that. My brother Troy Davis is innocent, but he's still on death row. And yes, the Supreme Court has ruled that he should get a hearing. But in this hearing, it will be a trial without a jury. So Troy's lawyers have to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that he is innocent. And this judge has to decide whether or not he believes that, and then he will deem whether Troy deserves a new trial. So this is not a slam dunk for this. This is an uphill battle that we have to fight. And so we need you, when we find out the hearing date, to be standing across the country saying, I am Troy Davis, and we are watching the state of Georgia. We are watching the Supreme Court, because the Supreme Court has never answered, does actual innocence take precedence over procedure? And that should be an abomination in 2010. So I just want to say that Howard Zinn has, I had a saying that I used to always tell people, and people used to tell me that that was so corny, and I would say, well, Howard Zinn said that, and in Georgia they said, you know, who is Howard Zinn? And I said, well, he used to teach at Spelman, and you know, but I live in Savannah, which is near Florida. But one thing that I want you to know that Mr. Zinn has said is that there is no flag large enough to cover the shame of killing people. His belief in the power of the ordinary people to make the positive changes needed in our society as pertains to human civil rights and injustice of any kind. So I'm especially honored to be able to stand before you to say, I am Troy Davis and I am innocent, and I'm never going to stop, because we are the voice for the voiceless, and we will continue. And I hope that one day when people say the name of Howard Zinn, they'll be saying the name of Martina Correia and Lawrence Hayes and Ronnie Kitchen and Marlene Martin, because we are the people that stood on principle and we did not give up.
Many of you have heard of the case of Troy Davis, but you may not know the name of Rodney Reed. We in the campaign to end the death penalty are determined to change that. Rodney is on death row in Texas after being tried by an all-white jury and sentenced to death 10 long years ago. There's actually a documentary about his case, State versus Reed. If you want to check that out, check out at the campaign table. There's also fact sheets and something in the New Abolitionist about Rodney. I want to introduce Sandra Reed, Rodney's mother, who is like so many of the family members who spend their life's energy working for justice. I've known Sandra for many, many years, and she's one of the most gentle and graceful people I've ever met. But with a steely determination, not only to win justice for Rodney, but to end the death penalty. So I introduce to you now, Sandra Reed.
Thank you, thank you, thank you. This is beautiful. You're all so beautiful. Yes, I am from the belly of the beast, Texas. As Marlene said, my son has been wrongfully convicted and sentenced to death row in Texas. And I'm here today as a voice for my son. I've told his story earlier, and as Marlene said, you can get the information out on the that's out there on the table. We've been in this struggle for 12 years, and I've experienced a lot of downs. The downs were being denied a fair trial. Every motion that was filed in Rodney's case has been denied. But the ups has been beautiful. When I see Kenneth Foster freed from death row, when I can see and touch Michael Scott, that was for murder of the Yoga Shop murders out of Austin, Texas. When I met and touched Marvin Reeves, Ronnie Kitchen, Mark Clements, to meet people that cares about right and wrong, such as the campaign to end the death penalty. As I said earlier, I don't know where I'd be if it wasn't for this campaign. The campaign that exposes the corruption of justice. I thank you for allowing me to tell the story of my son earlier. I wish I could tell it now, but it would take a while. And I thank you all for your support. I thank you for coming out. It means so much. I'm in this fight for life. What do we want? Win.
Okay, we're getting there, guys. We're getting close to getting to you guys. Okay. 13 years ago, when we launched the campaign to end the death penalty, Howard was there, and so was Lawrence Hayes. Lawrence Hayes, who spent 20 years in prison in New York, part of those years on death row. Since his release, he has made challenging the death penalty and winning justice his life's work. He's a former Black Panther, he's a fighter, an activist, and always one of the best speakers to speak against the death penalty, Lawrence Hayes.
Thank you. So that we can get along, let me, so we can hear Brother Howard Zinn. I remember I met Howard, as she said, in 1996, and it was a moment of moments. We birthed the campaign to end the death penalty, and we're here today to say, put an end to the death penalty. Killing is wrong. It's wrong when someone, citizen does it, and it's wrong when government does it. And we need to join the rest of Europe and the rest of the civilized world and abolish it. I have a privilege here. Howard Zinn, I read his book in prison, out in the Black Studies class, and I just want to take time to sort of combine history. This is an abolitionist movement, and I just want to speak the name of Howard Zinn and the words of Frederick Douglass, who said and left us a message. He said, slavery has been fruitful in giving itself names. It has been called the peculiar institution, the social system, and the impediment. It has been called by a great many names, and it will call itself by yet another name. You and I and you had better wait and see what new form this monster will assume, what new skin this snake will come forth next. It is in the criminal justice system of America that this snake rises its head, and it is up to the people, because it's the people whose power will change the destinies of this country. We are the people. Thank you, Howard.
So we hope this all gives you a sense of what the campaign is and what we're fighting for. So much of our struggle is against the isolation and the feeling of powerlessness that having a loved one in prison or on death row can bring. So we would like to just take a few moments to recognize and pay tribute to the former prisoners and family members who are here, who never really get recognized for what they do. Michelle Martin from the campaign chapter of the Campaign to End the Death Penalty. She is the fiancée of Stanley Howard, who I mentioned before, helped to form the Death Row 10, who unfortunately is still incarcerated, but we intend to welcome here next year. Yes. Michelle is going to acknowledge these family members and former prisoners, but please hold your applause until we reach the end of the list. And actually, for those people that hear their name, if you wouldn't mind standing up, we'd appreciate that when Michelle reads your name out. Thank you.
Hello, and anyone that's here that's a former prisoner and I don't have your name, can you please also stand up? We want to recognize you also. Okay, Daryl Cannon, Mark Clemens, Nathan Fields, Lawrence Hayes, Ronnie Hitchin, Marvin Reeves, Michael Scott, Darby Tillis, Darby Tillis. Come give them a hand. And all the family members, if I don't say your names, please stand up so we can acknowledge you. Jean Blunt, Jack Bryson, Horace Cole, Martina Correia, Sherman Davis, Bobby Flores, Arla Ingram, Veronica Luna, Barbara Lewis, Kathy McMillan, Dayla Perez Meyer, Durham Myers, Sandra Reed, Roderick Reed, Janine Scott, Carolyn Stanford, Rosemary Stark, Christine Thomas. Is there any other family members? I just want to thank the campaign for putting something like this every year. This has been a wonderful turnout. If everybody that's here can stand up and give yourself a hand for coming out to something like this every year. I mean, acknowledge being here.
Howard Zinn is a historian, an activist, and a renowned author of more than 20 books, including A People's History of the United States, You Can't Be Neutral on a Moving Train, SNCC, The New Abolitionist, guess where we got the name for our newsletter. He's brought history to life for so many of us here, a history that tells the stories of ordinary people who, when they come together to resist, change history. I'm also proud to introduce Dave Zirin, an author, an activist, a sports writer, columnist for The Nations, and socialistworker.org, recently named by, he was recently named as one of the 50 visionaries who are changing the world, who are going to change the world. Anyway, that's on tape. His most recent book is especially appropriate for tonight. It's called A People's History of Sports in the United States. Please give a warm welcome for a no-holds-barred conversation, Howard Zinn and Dave Zirin. Thanks, all.
No-holds-barred. Yes. No holds barred. No holds barred. This will be like Frost Nixon, except I'm not British and he's not evil. So we'll get started with that. How great is it that we're doing this at the University of Chicago, by the way? I feel like somewhere Milton Friedman is very unhappy. This is wonderful. Very true. Thank you, sir. Howard, just a question for you. It seems appropriate to ask this right off the bat. Why, for so many years, have you stood so steadfast against the death penalty?
Well, I thought it was obvious. It's obvious. I mean, it's for so many reasons, right? But just a gut feeling, no. First of all, I don't trust the states. I don't trust the government. I don't trust the judicial system. I don't trust district attorneys. I don't trust judges. I don't trust, and so why should I accept any judgment they make against a human being? I mean, these people are not fit to make such judgments, you see. And so, and, you know, and of course it was also obvious, who are the people that they sentence? Who are the people that they put on death row? Who are the people they put in prison? And we know who they are. They're mostly the poor, they're people of color, or the politically, you know, troublemakers, you know. And, you know, studying history, there are certain cases that I learned about. By the way, I didn't learn about that in school. If you want to study history, don't go to school. No. If you want to study history, well, especially not the University of Chicago, but if you...
Oh, snap!
But no, go to the library. The library is the place. And because that's what I did. I went all through the formal history training, right up through the PhD, you know, and a PhD in history. Oh, that must mean I know a lot of history. No. I learned my history outside the classroom. I learned it by reading on my own. And I read about the Haymarket Affair right here in Chicago. And I read about these people who were sentenced to death on the basis of, well, no evidence. But they were radicals. They were anarchists. They deserved to die, right? I remember when the campaign, it became an international campaign to save the Haymarket people who were sentenced to death, 8 of them sentenced to death. And the appeal was turned down by an 8-member Court of Appeals in the state of Illinois. And George Bernard Shaw, the great playwright, sent a message to this country. He said, you know, if your country needs to lose 8 people, they had better lose the 8 members of the Illinois Court of Appeals. And the Haymarket Affair taught me. It was interesting because there are these things that happen in history, these very special events, that when you read about them, you never forget about them. And there are people whose lives have been turned around by reading about some one thing that happened. Mm-hmm. It's like Emma Goldman.
Yeah.
Yeah, Emma Goldman. On my way here from Naperville High School, you know, because since I was coming here to speak, you know, what am I going to do?
Yeah, tell us about your day, Howard.
What's that?
Tell us about your day.
About my day, yeah. You know, I have some hours between landing here at O'Hare and speaking here, and after all, what am I going to do with those hours? They'll be wasted. I'll be sleeping. I'll be relaxing. I mustn't do that. I have to go and speak at Naperville High School, which was great. You know, speaking to high school kids, they are refreshing. They are bold. And they are the ones who we're counting on to change the world, right? Yeah. These young people, they're the ones, you know. And so I love to speak to high schools. And then they drove me from Naperville here, and they stopped at the Waldheim Cemetery so I could see the grave of Emma Goldman. How many of you know who Emma Goldman was? Yeah. You don't learn about her in school. Still, seriously. Here is one of the great figures of American history. You don't not learn about her in school. I'm right up through the PhD. I keep mentioning PhD. I'm so proud of it. What does it mean to have a PhD? It means you you study history basically from the same point of view that you got in elementary school, except with footnotes.
That actually gets to a point that I really want to ask you about.
Yeah.
And I'll start by asking the crowd here, how many people in this room, by applause, have read any of the People's History of the United States? An even more important question, how many people in this room have ever lent it to a friend or family member? That's royalties you don't get right there. No, seriously, explain for people here, what is a people's history? How does it differ from what you were just describing, the PhD version of history? What is a people's history, and how do you explain the impact of this book?
Ooh, this guy asks big questions. Do you know, he is the best sports writer in America. Well, you know, how many sports writers are there who have, you know, powerful social consciences? You know,
yeah, I know at least two.
And so when I discovered Dave Zirin, I claim I discovered him, you see? Like, you know, Columbus discovered America. I discovered Dave Zirin. They say America was here before Columbus. And I guess Dave Zirin was here before I discovered him, you see. But when I did discover him, I was exhilarated because I'm interested in sports. And finally, here's a sports writer who was interested in politics and philosophy and good things. So that's why it's a pleasure to be here on a platform with him.
So what is a people's history?
Even though he asks ridiculous
How do you explain
he asks
that?
ridiculous questions.
Yes, I do.
But let me answer you. Let me answer your question. Like, but the idea of the people's history, as you say, to learn a history that you're not taught in school, which means what? It means to learn about the struggles of ordinary people, to learn about history not from the standpoint of presidents and congresses and Supreme Courts and to read about, instead of reading about George Washington and John Adams and, yeah, do you know how many volumes have been written about George Washington? How many volumes have been written about the ordinary soldiers in the Revolutionary War who mutinied in Washington's army? You know something? In this whole country, with all the teaching that goes on about the Revolutionary War, which is one of our, great patriotic moments, they never teach about the mutinies in the Revolutionary Army. The ordinary soldiers, the working people, the farmers who discovered that war is a class phenomenon. That war, it's the rich who benefit from the war. And they discovered that the officers in Washington's army who came from the upper classes, they were well-dressed and well-fed and taken care of, while the ordinary soldier was not given any shoes or clothes or pay. So they mutinied by the thousands. But that's people's history, you see. The farmers after the Revolution who had been veterans of the Revolutionary War, and they come home, and the promises have not been kept. Or they're given land, and then the land is taxed so heavily they can't pay it. And so their farms are taken away from them. Foreclosures, we call it today, you see. And then they rebel, Shays' Rebellion. So I want to tell the story of the rebels, not of Washington and not of Andrew Jackson. It's interesting. I had different heroes. My heroes were not George Washington, Andrew Jackson, Abraham Lincoln, Roosevelt, Woodrow Wilson. No. My heroes were the opposition. My heroes were not Andrew Jackson, who killed Indians and yet became known as the great Democratic president. No, my heroes were the Cherokee Indians who refused to be removed by the U.S. Army as it drove them westward, I learned in school, Woodrow Wilson, idealist, founder of the League of Nations. Oh, by the way, he also had a PhD. That immediately prejudiced me against him. But Woodrow Wilson, yeah. By the way, he got the Nobel Prize, just like Kissinger did. Yeah. But Woodrow Wilson, in school we learned that he was one of the great liberal figures of American history. Woodrow Wilson, who bombarded the Mexican coast and killed hundreds of Mexicans because they refused to salute the American flag. Wilson, who invaded Haiti and the Dominican Republic and kept an occupying army there and killed several thousand Haitians because they rebelled against the occupation. Woodrow Wilson, who got us into the slaughterhouse of Europe in 1970. And
he was the anti-war candidate.
That's right. I'm glad you reminded me.
Well,
every once in a while, Dave reminds me of something in history that I forgot. You see, Woodrow Wilson promised to keep us out of war. And any time a president promises to keep you out of war, you know what's going to happen. You're going to go to war.
That actually goes right to what I wanted to ask you, because the news this morning that faced me over my morning coffee was that President Obama has apparently agreed to upping the troop level in Afghanistan by 35,000. And Afghanistan is often called a humanitarian or a just war. And I wanted to ask you, is there such a thing as a humanitarian war historically?
A humanitarian war.
You like that softball, by the way, for Howard Zinn?
War.
Yeah.
Well, I was in a war. Did you know that?
Yes.
Did you notice the silence? After I worked in the shipyard, went to work there at the age of 18, I volunteered for the Air Force in World War II. By the way, I just met a guy, there he is, who was a gunner on another air crew in World War II. And, there's always a special bond. But the point is that I was talking about humanitarian wars. World War II is supposedly a humanitarian war. Fighting against fascism. No. So World War II is a good test of whether you could have a good war, because World War II is the best. The best of wars, Yeah. And if World War II fails the test of a good war, then all the rest have certainly failed the test. And World War II, although I volunteered for it and dropped bombs in it and was an eager bombardier, when I began to think about it after the war, no, it was not a humanitarian war. It was not a just war. Because what happens in war is war poisons everybody who engages in it. War corrupts everybody who engages in it. You start out with, they're the bad guys, we're the good guys. Soon you're the bad guys also. And they commit atrocities. Oh, they're bad, fascists, they are bad. But then you commit atrocities. You bomb Hiroshima and Nagasaki. You bomb Dresden. You bomb Tokyo. How many Americans know that several months before the bombing of Hiroshima, we firebombed Tokyo and killed 100,000 people in one night? Not too many people know about that. Talk about learning history. War is always the indiscriminate killing of huge numbers of people for a cause which may look right at the time, but which disappears with time. So no, there's no such thing as a good war, a just war. It's the children who die in war. I have a good friend in Italy, Gino Strada. He's a war surgeon. He has done surgery on war victims in Africa and Middle East for 15 years, in Afghanistan, in Iraq. And he told me that, 80% of the people who come into his hospitals with a, shattered and he has to do amputation, 80% of them are civilians and 1/3 of them are children. War is inevitably a war against children. So no war can be tolerated. The human race has to find a way of dealing with problems in the world without war. Yeah.
You just said something in the middle of that where you said that war poisons everything it touches. I know we all heard about the horrific shooting at Fort Hood. I wonder how many people here have been not just horrified by what happened, but enraged by the media coverage that's happened in the aftermath of that shooting. There are two arguments that seem to be coming out about the media, either on the Fox News analysis that this is about Islam, that's why this happened, and then you have the mainstream analysis that this is about an individual's mental problems, an individual's psychosis, but no discussion at all about the fact that it happens in the context of a war that's killed hundreds of thousands of people across the world, and that this person's job was actually to listen to the stories of soldiers who had come back. And then he heard that he had to go over. Is that an example of war poisoning everything it touches?
Yeah, absolutely. No, that's, what happened there is a really demonstration of what war does to people. And it can drive you crazy. You might say it drove him berserk, but think of all the others. Think of all the other veterans of war. They may not go on a shooting rampage, but something is happening to them. I mean, the amount of mental illness that comes out of war, the number of suicides. Did you know at a certain point, maybe it was 10 years, or 12 years, 15 years, I forget, after the end of the Vietnam War, I read a statistic which absolutely startled me. It said more Vietnam veterans have died of suicide since the end of the Vietnam War than died in the war itself.
That's true.
Yeah. Suicide. No, war, yeah. And so it's just an added instance of the huge crime committed by governments when they send people to war. And
it just makes you think about,
if you start out with the idea that you can't trust governments, and that I start out with that idea all the time. You can't trust those people in power. You can't trust the state. So from the beginning, if they are telling you that this is a just war, you know immediately something, you can't believe them.
It reminds me of a quote from a person who I first read reading your book, a man by the name of Eugene Victor Debs, who said that the American criminal justice system is like a magical fishing net that catches the minnows while the whales go free. And you think about that this country has 2 million people behind bars.
Yeah.
While there is criminalization that happens at the level of government that people get medals for.
The hypocrisy.
It's jarring.
Yeah. And I've had a correspondence with prisoners over the years, and especially there are two guys that I've had there are three men. There's a woman in Wisconsin also, but the two guys I've had correspondence with for probably 25 years. Well, they're lifers. What they call natural lifers. I like that phrase, which means they have no chance of parole, And I've had this long correspondence with them. These are magnificent people. These are, there's one of them, Tiwatala Salael. Some of you may have heard of him. From his prison cell, he has organized a campaign against imprisonment. And the other guy who's in prison in Massachusetts, who's been in prison, And these are magnificent human beings. Somewhere back there, maybe they did something, maybe they didn't. It's not a matter whether they're innocent. Maybe they were guilty of something. It's not just a matter of innocence. So maybe they were guilty of something when they were 18 years old. And here it is, 30 years later, and it's still in prison. And these are rare and extraordinary people. One of them, this guy named Kevin Hicks that I correspond with, who's in a Massachusetts prison. He's a working class. Well, most of these people are working class, right? Both these guys happen to be black. Kevin Hicks is a black guy who was in a shootout and a robbery when he was 18 years old, and here it is, 30 years later. And he taught himself, like Frederick Douglass as a slave, taught himself to read. Kevin Hicks taught himself to read. And he has written novels and plays and poems and autobiography. And he sends me these things. It's amazing. And I think to myself, my God, they're keeping this guy in prison. And there are all of these idiots and, up there in high office. I mean, the word hypocrisy doesn't even begin to describe the criminal justice system. Yeah.
There's actually a gentleman here tonight. If I get his name wrong, I apologize. His name is Sherman Davis, who spoke earlier today. I believe his first cousin, sent to prison at age 14, still there at age 33, tried as an adult for being an accomplice. I mean, it makes you think about the vast human potential that the country wastes.
It's not just 2 million people in prison. There are probably 8 million people, 8 to 10 million people who have been in and out, who have had some connection with the prison system. They've been in prison, they're on parole, they're on probation. So think of that, something like 8 to 10 million people in this so-called civilized society. When people say to me, and sometimes people say to me, well, the United States, it's amazing how Americans grow up with a kind of mythology. Oh, we are the greatest. We are number one. Number one in what? Number one in imprisonment, but not number one in healthcare. Not number one to take care of kids. No. And, it's, yeah.
Yeah. I want to ask you, though, about the prospect of looking to Washington, D.C. for change, because Bill Maher, people know who Bill Maher is. He had a line recently about our two grand political parties where he said you have two parties in this country, a center-right party, that's the Democrats, and another party that's in a mental institution. That's the Republicans. And yet, I hear people all the time, I'm sure you hear people all the time, that preach patience right now and say we need to wait and give President Obama a chance to work this out himself.
Green Party! Green Party!
And some may disagree. But I did want to hear what you think about that.
Well, I voted for Obama. I was happy that he won. Well, I was happy to see that Bush gang leave the White House, right? But I also knew that Obama was a politician. A politician. The signal that I got from him came early, even before the presidential campaign, and it came when there was a primary campaign in Connecticut, some of you may remember, and Lieberman, Joseph Lieberman, the war hawk, one of the worst. Joseph Lieberman was running in Connecticut. We're having a signing here.
Now that was for Lieberman.
David is the signer for what I am saying. Right.
I just don't like the man. I'm sorry. It gets me agitated. Thank you.
Lieberman was running for the Democratic nomination, for the Senate. And opposed to him running for the Democratic nomination was a guy named Lamont, who was against the war. It was very clear. Lieberman for the war, this guy Lamont against the war. Obama goes to Connecticut to campaign for Lieberman. And when that happened, I said to myself, okay, I know this guy. He's a typical Democrat. And the Democrat Party has been as warlike as the Republican Party. You know, in the matters of foreign policy and militarism and expansion, the Democratic Party has been just as bad, sometimes worse, than the Republican Party. And Obama is, there's nothing, when people say give him a chance, they say, well, he's only been a year. He say, oh, he came in with this enormous burden that Bush left him. Well, so you can't expect things to happen overnight. Okay, there's this enormous burden that Bush left. So you would expect that in a year, he would at least take an ounce off this burden. No, instead he has added to the burden. He has increased the military budget over the Bush military budget. And of course he is sending more troops to Afghanistan than even Bush did. So, no, when people say patience, one thing that they don't understand, the presidents don't change things for the good on their own. No, you cannot depend, and you know, here's something black people in the South knew. You know, and when I was in the South involved in the movement, there's one thing the movement learned was very clear. They could not depend on the federal government. And the federal government was supposedly liberal. Kennedy and Johnson, no, you couldn't depend on them to enforce the 14th and 15th Amendment. You couldn't even depend on them to obey the Constitution. And so what the black people in the South learned is they had to do it themselves. We can't depend on Obama, not at all. We have to do it ourselves, you know.
Terrific line by, I know, one of your favorite younger writers, Naomi Klein, who said that the best thing about, all right, yeah, she's no fan of this place, you can believe that, University of Chicago. She said the best thing about Obama is the worst thing about Obama. It's that he responds to pressure. And he's getting all kinds of pressure from the banks, from the generals and whatnot. And the idea that we would be silent and not exert our own pressure seems like an act of political suicide on our part.
Yeah.
And I had the privilege a couple weeks ago of being in Washington, D.C. with about 200,000 of my closest friends, marching for rights for lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgender people. And it was young, it was angry, and the best thing about it, it was impatient, which I think we can all learn something from.
Yeah, absolutely.
I do have to ask you one thing, though. I got to ask you something else, though. Because you mentioned Ned Lamont and his campaign against Joe Lieberman. I keep remembering that one of Joe Lieberman's criticisms of Ned Lamont was he said, do you know that his grandfather was a socialist?
Ooh.
That was one of the things. And you've heard the word socialist thrown out. It's definitely against Obama. I mean, what do they call him now, like a commie Nazi, which is wrong on about 50 different levels. It's like, I don't know what part of that to correct first. But I think the one thing we can agree with Barack Obama about is that he's not a socialist. And so what do you make of this, about this reinvigoration of the word socialist in the mainstream media?
Yeah, I'm really happy. I'm happy that the word socialism is entering the conversation, you know, despite the way in which it is entering. But, you know, if Obama says, well, I think we ought to have slightly more taxes on the rich and help the poor a little, everything he does is, you know, little. When he does that, people say, that's socialism. Wow. I thought when I saw that in the paper, I said, well, you know, I think a lot of people are going to say to themselves, oh, that's socialism? When you do more for the poor and less for the rich, that's socialism? Hey, that's good. That's, you know, I've never thought that we should be afraid of the word socialism. You know, the Soviet Union gave socialism a bad name. You know, the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics gave socialism a bad name. And, but socialism, there was socialism before the Soviet Union existed. Before the Soviet Union existed, you know, people forget that we had a great socialist movement in this country in the early years of the 20th century before the Bolshevik Revolution. We had Eugene Debs, you know, and Emma Goldman and Clarence Darrow and Upton Sinclair. We had a million people in this country reading socialist newspapers. And I think it's very important not to run away from the word socialist and instead to talk about it and say, hey, how, do you think that we should have a better distribution of wealth in the country? Do you think everybody should have free health care? Do you think people without jobs should be guaranteed jobs? You know? Do you think we should maybe use the wealth of this country for human needs and not just do what is profitable for corporations? Do you think we should stop being a war-making? And people say, yes, 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 yes. Then you can quickly say, that's socialism.
And another word that's in the media in a big way, capitalism.
Oh, capitalism.
Recent movie.
Michael Moore.
Capitalism.
How many of you have seen Michael Moore's movie? Yeah. It's great that people are talking about capitalism and socialism. In fact, when was it? Last week, actually, I was invited to speak in the financial district of Boston, a place where I don't usually go and where I'm not usually invited. And where I think if I was always afraid if I went to the financial district, I'd be arrested. But I was invited to come there to speak to a group of hotshot lawyers and financial people and financial advisors. Because they had a forum every month, and they decided, oh, we're going to have a forum this time on capitalism. I thought that was progress. Since when have these people had a forum on capitalism? So they invited a capitalist, some guy who writes, you know, about the market and financial things, and they invited me. And it was great because I had an opportunity to talk about capitalism. And and it's interesting because when you get away from the abstractions, when you get away from the isms and the names, and you say, should homes be built on the basis of who has the money and which homes are most profitable? Or should homes be built on the basis of who needs them most? Should high tower insurance company buildings be built because they're profitable and poor people not have any homes because it's not profitable? Well, it's interesting. Even when you ask people with money, if you put a question to them in a humanitarian way, without abstractions dealing with capitalism and socialism, they come up with a right answer. And I have never hesitated to say that capitalism is a failure, total failure. I make a point of that. I make a point of that because, oh, capitalism, America, this is the greatest, you know. No, it's not. Capitalism is a failure. Sure, we have a huge gross national product, a very gross national product. We produce more things, but where does it go? Who has it? Who profits from it? And so it's a failure. It's a failure because it is enormously productive, and yet it is poisoned by poverty and child sickness and and millions of people in prison, and there's so many signs of a society which is basically sick and which needs health care. Yeah, we need health care for not only for our people, we need health care for the society.
I do, before we finish out here tonight, I do feel the need to ask you one more question, because I look at this room and I see a lot of young people and a lot of, hey, how you doing, young people? And a lot of not so young people who may be thinking to themselves about devoting their lives to the cause of social justice. And unquestionably, we will hear from people around us that we are wasting our time. What do you say to combat that?
Yeah. In every period of history, people who fought against injustice were considered wasting their time, but they persisted and persisted and persisted. All social movements that have achieved anything started very small and seemed as if they wouldn't go anywhere. And people get discouraged. But there were people who held on and held on and held on. If they hold on, the movement grows. And the reason it grows is because the truth is on our side. And people basically have good instincts. Fundamentally, down deep, before they are deceived by propaganda, people don't want war. People don't want anybody to be poor and homeless. People are decent, and when the truth comes to them, then they react, and then you have social movements grow. So there's no if you have a historic perspective and you see that other movements have gone through this, who knew that the South would rise? Who knew that the anti-war movement would get to a point where the government had to say, oh, we can't go on anymore? Who knew that the women's movement would create a new consciousness in this country? Well, who knew that we'd get to the point where you could have the kind of gathering of hundreds of thousands for gay and lesbian rights? No. I think it's important to understand that when you think you are powerless, that the power of the people on top is only possessed by them as a result of the obedience of people below. When people withhold their obedience, they are helpless. It's like when you can have the most powerful corporation in the world. You can have General Motors, you can have Texaco. If their workers go out on strike, they are helpless. In the 1930s, people said, you can't defeat Ford and General Motors. When their factories stopped working, they were defeated. So, yes, when workers go on strike, when consumers boycott. I remember when Jesse Jackson threatened the boycott of Texaco because Texaco was engaging in some racist things, and he threatened to call a boycott. Whoa, that scares them, a boycott. People stop buying our stuff. Whoa, they caved in. We have an immense, when they depend on soldiers to fight wars. When soldiers stop obeying orders, and that happened in Vietnam, We had a great Vietnam, soldiers revolted in the Vietnam War. There were pilots who wouldn't fly anymore. There were soldiers who wouldn't go out and patrol anymore. The morale of when they can't depend on the soldiers and the soldiers don't obey anymore, they can't carry on the war. So the power, the power is in the hands of the people. I just want to say one more thing, and I'd say one more thing to young people especially. By young people, I mean everybody in this audience who is younger than me. In other words, 99% of the people in this audience, I address you. And that is, and maybe this is something you already know, but I don't care, I'll tell you anyway. But if you get involved in a movement, whether you win or lose today or tomorrow, because you never know. You see, you never know whether you're going to win or lose. But you've got to do it. Because if you don't do it, you will lose, definitely. If you do it, if you act, you'll have a chance of winning. A chance. But that's the only, okay. But if you do get involved, your life will be better. You know, you'll feel better. It's fun to be in a social movement with other people who think and feel the way you do. It makes life more interesting. It makes life more fulfilling. So that whether you win or lose, you know, ultimately this, you may not. But in the meantime, in the meantime, you will win.
Howard Zinn, can I get a terrorist fist bump? Thank you very much. Thank you. Howard Zinn, ladies and gentlemen. Now before people go, okay, keep it on.
Everything I do seems to end in vain. I may be blind, I may be lame, and in the master's name, yet I'm treated so bad. Change, treated so bad. Yeah, I'm treated so bad. Lord, I'm treated so bad. Lord, I'm treated so bad.
Thank you. Howard Zinn, ladies and gentlemen. Now before people go, okay, keep it on. before people go, give me a hug. Before people go, we do have some closing remarks, very brief, before you buy Howard's books and lend it to your 20 closest friends. Darryl Myers, who's on the board of the Campaign to End the Death Penalty, and who is a member of Murder Victim Families for Human Rights, is going to just say a couple of closing words for us tonight.
It's such an honor to be on the stage with these guys, and it's such an honor to be in a room with all of you. I want to start out with a question. How many here feel like you're a better human being because of who you spent this evening with? How many of you feel at least a little more powerful in your life because of this evening? Now I'm going to make it real easy for you to participate in this important struggle. But first I'm going to tell you an important story about an important Chicago boy named Emmett Till. Emmett Till grew up in Chicago, which of course was racist and segregated and all that, but he never knew the depths of racism in the South. He went down south to visit relatives. And this young, happy, beautiful boy smiled at a woman who happened to be white. Being polite, thinking that he's coming down from Chicago, he wants to be nice to these Southern folks. Well, that was the wrong thing to do. And I believe it was 3 white men defending the virginity and the integrity and the purity of their white women, kidnapped this 12-year-old child and beat him to death. They took the body and they nailed it in a coffin. They screwed it tight. They made it almost impossible to open, so that when his mother came down south from Chicago to pick him up, they told her, the law told her, it's illegal for you to open this coffin. And Mamie Till brought her son back to Chicago and opened that coffin, because she said she wants the world to see the face of racism. And that courage of that one mother was an important step in the beginning of a whole new civil rights struggle in America. I want to give you the opportunity to participate in another early part of a new civil rights movement that's taking place in the prison system. If you feel good about being with these people tonight, please help show the human face of the folks who are suffering the injustices of the criminal justice system. At the back of the room, there will be buckets. Please help. Everything takes money. We don't have big donors and foundations to make this a humane place to live. We need you, the little people of this world, because together we will win.
Hi, everybody. My name is Lee. I'm with the Campaign to End the Death Penalty. Thank you so much for coming out for such a fantastic evening. I need to make a couple really critical announcements here. As we all have heard tonight, it's voices like Howard's and Dave's that are so indispensable for us, for the struggles ahead, the struggle to get rid of the racist death penalty, the struggles to build the kind of social movements that are going to undo the barbarism that Howard and Dave just talked about, the 2.5 million people behind bars, the people without health care, the people without union rights, and so on. Luckily, though, we don't just have Howard and Dave's words here tonight. You can actually take home Howard's books with you tonight. We have a very special offer from Haymarket Books. Haymarket Books, very rightly called Books for Changing the World. Tonight, you can get, for $20, the newly released Voices of a People's History, which is a tie-in to the upcoming History Channel documentary called The People Speak. It's going to be coming out in December. So I would encourage people to pick it up at the back, and that's where you'll find not just Howard's books, but Dave Zirin's books and the many other brilliant Haymarket authors who write on the subterranean fire, the struggle of working people, the meaning of Marxism, the fight against racism, and so on. Aaron Dadijour's new book, many, many others that are really key to building the movements ahead. Not only, though, do we have in this room the ideas and the tools to organize our fights ahead, but we have a few people here who are going to say very quick words about how you can leave here further armed, not just in your ideas, but further organized in the front against racial injustice. And so I'm going to bring up very quickly, for 1 minute each, some important people to tell you about how you can walk out of here organized better than you were when you came in here. The first person I'm going to bring up is Edward James from the Organization of Black Students here at the U of C.
Good evening. Mr. Zinn, I want to thank you personally because as a history major, you've inspired me to explore further the narrow lessons that I learned in the walls of academia, so I thank you. On behalf of the OBS Executive Board and members, we'd like to thank you for your participation in tonight's event. The Organization of Black Students was founded on the University of Chicago's campus in 1968. OBS's purpose and main focus is to provide an organizational framework to address issues of concern in the Black community. OBS strives to build a better understanding of the Black experience that through its members, programs, resources, and functions will permeate the university atmosphere. In this respect, OBS strives to contribute to the pursuit of multicultural expression, understanding, and awareness. OBS exists to serve both our campus community and our neighboring communities. And I implore you all to not acquiesce in the face of discrimination. And in the words of Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. Continue to fight on the battlefield. Thank you.
And now we're going to hear from Camille Erickson from the Chicago Campaign to End the Death Penalty.
Hi, I'm Camille, representing the Campaign to End the Death Penalty here in Chicago. I'd just like to reiterate what Howard Zinn was saying, that heroes are in the opposition. And I want you to be that opposition today and tomorrow. And becoming involved with the Campaign to End the Death Penalty is just one way that you can apply what you have heard spoken tonight. The campaign has a chapter which meets monthly in Chicago that is continuously striving to bring justice to this broken system. Through our strong contacts with exonerated prisoners and specific cases, we are creating public awareness for this national movement. But progress can only be achieved by gaining support with your help. So please sign up to get in contact. There's a sheet going around as well as tables in the back that you can learn how to become involved in the demonstrations, in the meetings, and in the petitions. And the work that you are able to extend will only help build this powerful movement and make the death penalty history. So let's apply this impatience that we're feeling tonight to the death penalty. Thank you.
I'm going to hear real quick from my brother here in the Cop Watch, Chicago.
I'll be real quick. We've talked a lot about injustice and the things that are happening specifically in the criminal justice system. And it starts, and one thing we're not saying is it starts right where in the streets with the police. And the best way to stop all this is to monitor the police. So we're in desperate need of people to come and join us and patrol and watch the police. Just go to chicagocopwatch.org. Contact me, there's a form right there, and we'll get everything set straight out. All right, thanks.
The last person we're going to hear from is a very brief announcement from an important lawyer, social justice lawyer named Flint Taylor from the People's Law Office here in Chicago.
Thank you. Howard, you have supported us since 1976 in the fight for justice in the Fred Hampton case. Dave, you and Howard have supported us in our 25-year struggle to get John Burge indicted. We have, in fact, a great victory here in the last year in getting John Burge indicted, a message that can be sent to the entire country about
the conscience of the city and the conscience of this country that cannot be cured until all the torturers and their enablers are put in prison and all the victims are set free. Now, you've heard about a delay this week in the Burge trial, and I know you're all outraged, you're upset, you're frustrated. But remember, it took us 25 years to get him indicted. A few more months to get him put behind bars should not dissuade us. And during those few months, you know what we can do. We can get those other men indicted. We can push those investigations against the other torturers. We can deal with the 20 men who are still behind bars. Come next Tuesday at Lisa Madigan's office to protest her position on these cases and demand that the men who are still behind bars, based on the tortured confessions by John Burge, are free. Until all of the torturers and their enablers are behind bars and all of the victims are set free, our work, all of our collective work, is not done. Let's strive and continue for that victory. Thank you.
Now, we're going to close it out with a song, but before I turn it over to Darby Tillis, I just want to let people know that we are going to be having a book signing, but we have a very limited window of time, I'm afraid. We're going to have about 15 minutes, 20 minutes for book signing. We're going to do the best we can. What we're going to do is we're going to pause for, during the song so Howard and Dave can collect their breaths and so on, and then we'll have a book signing for about 15, 20 minutes. So hopefully as many of you as possible can kind of make it up. And I apologize in advance if that's not possible. Darby Tillis is going to step up. Darby Tillis is the first death row exoneree from the state of Illinois, and he is going to say a greeting to Howard, and we're going to hear a song from him that he composed for Troy Davis.
Wow! This has been one wonderful night. Howard, Dave, we truly thank you. I have really enjoyed tonight. I have really learned something tonight. And I double thank you. And just have a good time the rest of the night. Thank you. Sits on a Peter Hill, down in a Georgia death row cell. Nights are hot, the days are long. Troy Davis didn't do no wrong. Mr. Chester's here, I believe. Time to sit, Troy Davis free. Make your call and write your letter. Come on, y'all, let's get together. There's power in big numbers. Gotta free Troy by end of summer. Out there, I know what it's like. Thanks to God, I made it back. Make your calls and write the letter. Come on, y'all, let's fight together. Make your calls and write your letter. Come on, y'all, let's fight together. I was there, I know what it's like. Thanks to God, I made it back.
I done no wrong, yet I'm treated so bad. I'm gonna walk out in the master's name. Everything I do seems to end in vain. I may be blind, I may be lame, and in the master's name, yet I'm treated so bad. Change, treated so bad. Yeah, I'm treated so bad.